Taxi Uber Lyft drivers of Reddit, what are the most interesting, entertaining, ducked up situations that happened to you during the shift? I used to drive Uber at Fort Myers Beach. I picked up 4 drunk as a skunk middle-aged people and crammed them into my tiny car. I was about to pull into their neighborhood, nice, gated, on the water, and the one guy was like, "I need you to follow that car," and I'm like, whatever. Let's see how this plays out. So we start following this random SUV and I'm like, who is this guy? And they are like, we don't know. But we have 20 minutes of babysitter left and we aren't wasting it. I reminded them they were on triple rate surcharge and they literally didn't care. Eventually the car pulled over and everyone shouts at me, "Go go go," and we sped off into the night. $100 ride. $20 tip. 5-star review. 100% worth it. Entertaining drunk. Otherwise responsible people is a blast. Friend of mine visiting Nick took a taxi back to his hotel late night. Riding in the back he found a small women's clutch purse thing. Inside was the ID of a 19-year-old girl and the business card of a police officer in a town neighboring state. The police officer had the same last name as the girl. So my friend figured the officer was the girl's father and she carried the card in case she ever needed to get herself out of a traffic ticket or something. My friend figures he can leave a voicemail on the officer's business number when he gets back to the hotel. Then leave the purse at the hotel front desk for the girl to come pick up. So that is exactly what he does as soon as he gets up to the hotel room. About 3 hours later, now 3 or 4 AM, he is in a deep sleep when loud knocks on his hotel room door wake him up. It's a bunch of NYPD detectives who want to know all the details of how he found the purse. Like where he originally hailed the cab, etc. Turns out the girl was indeed the daughter of the cop on the business card. And she had been missing for a few days. The discovery of her clutch purse was the first sign of her that had popped up. My friend had paid for the cab via credit card and had kept the receipt. So he was able to pass that along to the detectives who, presumably, were able to use that to track down the cab driver and find out any information he could provide. Ultimately my friend doesn't know what happened. The cops never contacted him again. Not a driver, but was recently a passenger in an Uber. It was a Monday morning. So of course I was a little down and not in the mood to talk too much. The driver starts going on about how beautiful the weather is and starts explaining a good day starts with being positive. She then asks if I would like to see her book. I was a little confused, but I said sure. She starts explaining that she carries this scrapbook with index cards and markers for all of her riders. She said she usually asks them to write some sort of positive message or just tells them they can simply write whatever they want. This book was filled with notes from people where we live, outside of the area, and even from people traveling from outside of the country. Some writing uplifting messages, some writing random funny lines, some drunks scribbling support for our sports teams. Just so many different messages from so many random people on different walks in life. Before I got out, I told her how the messages completely turned my Monday around for the better and I really appreciate what she does. She simply said, if she can bring a smile to someone's face, her day is made. I now always hope that I have the same driver whenever I request an Uber so I get a chance to continue reading the book of positivity. I matched with a girl on Tinder by accident, and she messaged me saying she liked PBR, which is in one of my pictures. Being awkward and not wanting to waste her time, I just unmatched without saying anything. Around this time I was near the beginning of my brief tenure as an Uber driver. And who the duck do you think I pick up the very next day? I immediately try to slouch hoping she doesn't recognize me. And after 5 minutes of silence, right when I think I'm in the clear, she says, "Hey, did we match on Tinder?" To which I reply, "I don't think so." Then she says, "Yeah, I messaged you about PBR and then you unmatched me." And I just let out a feeble kind of "oh, yeah." Then I look down at my GPS. And there's 25 minutes left in this ride. I did not get a tip. I was unemployed at the time. Quit a job due to an abusive, toxic work environment. Had recently graduated a coding boot camp but wasn't having any luck landing new opportunities. Bills were piling up. And honestly I was losing hope. I'm about to call it a night. Driving drunks around gets tiring when I decide what one more. Turns out these 3 older women wanted to do some gambling in the next state over and had trouble finding a ride. I said yes. Figured I'd just call it a night after. We get talking. Turns out one of them is an IT consultant. They decide to pay me basically $100 an hour to hang out till they are done and drive them all home. We ended up connecting. She revised my resume and put me in touch with some references of hers. I ended up making a good buck off the fares alone. And also ended up completely turning my life around by landing a dream job with a little bit of help. I wrote her a sincere thank you once I accepted the new offer and she replied with help others because you can. Not a day goes by where I don't think about how lucky I am. Edit. Thanks for the silver. It's really been a wild ride. I'm glad I can share. Back in the 70s as a student I drove a taxi in the weekends and some evenings nights to earn some extra money. One time, late at night I got a call to pick a guy up at his home. At arrival the guy hops in the back with a sports bag with few rifles sticking out. I could see that in my rearview mirror. He wanted me to drive out of town to some B road and in the middle of nowhere he told me to stop the car on a small road in an area with a lot of trees. Hopped out of the car with his bag. Came back few minutes later without the bag and told me to head back to his place and drop him off. He gave me a huge tip and this is the first time I have mentioned this happened. Picked up 2 guys from a hotel. Destination is in the Hollywood Hills. When we're navigating up the winding roads of the hills, one of the guys mentions that he hates going to famous football player's house because he always gets a little car sick. He tells me he knows this player because he plays for the famous player's alma mater and is in town to work out for the NFL draft that year. This house is at the top of a hill with a beautiful view. When we get there, the drafted asks me to wait for a couple minutes and he enters the house. After a while, he gets back in the car and tells me I'm gonna follow 3 other cars to Six Flags. First car is a big black Suburban followed by 2 luxury German sedans and here I am with my economy car with an Uber sticker on it. I drove a taxi in a suburb of Boston for a while in the 80s. One day, a kid in his 20s with a baseball bat hailed me and asked me to take him to a pharmacy nearby. It was the middle of the day, so I assumed he was coming from softball practice. He told me to wait. Then he went into the pharmacy and left the bat in the car. A minute or 2 later, he came running out of the pharmacy with the pharmacist right behind him. Was this guy nuts? What kind of criminal uses a cab as a getaway car? I casually reached back and locked the door just as he reached the cab. He fumbled with the handle, realizing that he left his only defensive weapon inside, and then ran off. I let the pharmacist into the cab, and then the 2 of us made a slow pursuit of the guy, while reporting his location over the radio. No cell phones. Eventually, he was so exhausted that I got out of the cab and held him until the police arrived. I had to testify in court and identify him. Not the sharpest tool in the shed. I picked up a guy who either refused to pay a hooker from the night before or didn't know she was a lady of the night. She proceeded to follow us. Finally he gets a call from someone. Seemed like it scared him because he told me to bring him back to his place. She followed us back there. I promptly left. Probably should have kicked him out sooner. That's why you always count your money beforehand and put it aside in your back before the transaction of services. Drove for Uber for a bit. Once picked up this guy who ended up being a magician. It's 2 AM and had to drive him into Manhattan to his apartment. It was weird cause nobody was around. The city was dead quiet for some reason. He sat in the front seat and told me stories the whole ride there. Once there he told me to get out and did a magic trick for me. He made 4 $100 bills turn into $4 bills and gave me it for a tip. Not me, but my mom. She was delivering Uber Eats last winter to some guy a little out of town. The location was a bit odd, but she went with it. Just outside our city on one of the side roads by some train tracks, she parked her car and looked around for any houses. None. There was a train stop nearby and suddenly my mom noticed a guy waddling through the deep snow towards her. "Are you?" Random name. Calling him Bob. "Bob?" He nodded. Took the food. And waddled towards the train. Suddenly it starts up. And continues down the tracks. This guy dead ass ordered Uber Eats while conducting a train. Had a former NFL player live tweet from my backseat that he wanted to punch me in the mouth because I was chewing gum and he could hear it. Never said a word to me. I didn't even realize I was doing it. Maybe be an adult and let someone know next time instead of threatening them on social media like a little itch. The folks driving you are people. 2. I picked up 4 guys wearing neon green tutus. The guy in the front seat looks at me while I'm driving and says, "Don't do drugs," then proceeds to snort cocaine from some sort of vial. I smiled and said, "Please don't do drugs in my car." Picked a guy up from a strip club around 5 PM. He had clearly been there for a while and was talkative drunk. He started talking to a friend on his phone and kept saying he couldn't go into detail because he had a lady driver. He told me he was going home and then taking his daughter out to a basketball game because there was a after game concert she was very excited about. Little did he know, or I know because I was just following the GPS, that he had been routed to her high school. Dude's in a rumpled suit. Smells like strip club. And is clearly not sober. He got a resolved look. Handed me a few singles. Said thanks for the ride boo. And just hitched up his pants like a man embracing his itty situation. This makes me kinda sad. I drove for Uber and Lyft for a short time. There was one situation I will never forget. I was driving downtown DSM and picked up a gentleman who was just getting out of the Cubs game. He was loaded down with Cubs gear, he told me about $400 worth, and was absolutely trashed from drinking all day at the game. The first thing he says when he gets in is, "I know my destination is X, but I need to go to my hotel first to put all this stuff away." I say, "No problem," and he lets me know how appreciative he is and he will make it worth my time. I honestly didn't mind waiting because the ride was still active, so I was still making money. He gets back in the car and we start heading toward his original destination, about 30 minutes away. We get to talking and apparently he is a beverage distributor for a company in CA. He is doing some sales in the area and asks me if I like to drink. I told him I do on occasion. To which he replies, "Do you like vodka?" And passes a full bottle of vodka to me in the driver's seat. It was sealed, thank God. He told me it was a new kind of vodka that he was trying to get on the shelves of some local bars because this vodka was originally created by some ISU students. When we arrived at the destination, he thanked me again for going out of my way to drop him off and let me keep the bottle as a tip. Definitely one to remember. My most memorable would be, I picked up a girl coming home from work. We started talking about my education and what I did before Uber, and it just turned out that her company was looking for my skills. She gave me her card. I shot her my resume and 2 years later I'm still working for that company and have been promoted to JR Executive LVL. I've never had to drive an Uber since. Not a driver, but had a mate pull up the handbrake in a moving taxi last week after a big night out. Thought it'd be hilarious to do a runner straight after it came screeching to a stop. Guess who left their iPhone with a special wallet case sitting on the seat? This is so ducked up. I rolled a car a few years ago because someone pulled the handbrake as I was going around a corner on loose gravel. Please tell your friend that it is a very dangerous thing to do. I think the coolest thing not many people realize about Uber Lyft is you have no hours or set times to work. So when I used to work in a college town, I would often get invited into places or parties, and if I had made enough money or it seemed slow, I would just sign off and see where the night took me. Not me, but my cousin drives Uber. He often tells stories about creepy sick strange passengers on every family gathering. So there is quite a lot. But not that much interesting. Except those 3. He dropped a guy. Dressed up to the nines. with bouquet of roses at his fiancee's address. She was really surprised when he broke up the engagement very next day. As an added level of what the duckery, it came out around a week later that my cousin was the side guy. Their engagement was done in front of her parents too. He also had replaced the backseat and half of carpeting because woman broke water and started to deliver a baby while he was driving her to the hospital with her husband. They were going there to induce the labor, as it was past term. He laughs that he shook the baby out of her. Fun fact, Uber does not cover replacing destroyed interior parts in my country. And insurance also said no. So he had to pay out of his pocket. He also failed police drug sting operation. He was asked to drive her back to location. He immediately thought it was way too fishy and pulled up to the nearest police station. And lo and behold, totem bag full of plastic string bags with white powder and a tracker. He sometimes delivers things like clothes in a bag to the gym or groceries. But the guy weirded him out. This didn't happen to me. A friend of mine drives for Uber and picked up a girl on her way home from a night out. She was in the backseat and he assumed she was sleeping. Turns out she had overdosed and died whilst he was driving her home. Super depressing. Uber passenger here. Not driver. But in my literal first ever Uber, the driver told me she got in an accident 2 days prior. And followed that story with "I mean 2 accidents in 2 weeks, why do I still have this job?" Then laughed and laughed. Yeah, I definitely felt safe. Another driver went 30 over the limit everywhere he went. Dude was going full speed racer and I felt like the we're going over that cliff. Guy from the show. Lastly, I had one driver that kept asking me if I've ever done cocaine, and when I said no and have no plans on it, he told me I was wasting my life away being the loser at the parties that just sits there doing nothing while everyone goes wild. Okay, buddy. Lol. I have been in 6 Ubers and have 3 stories. Really says a lot. The last Uber rider I ever picked up was a teenage kid, maybe 16ish, and what I would assume was his girlfriend. They got in the backseat and after a few minutes started to hear some unsettling sounds. Look back and she is straight up blowing him in my backseat. It was like 3 in the afternoon and I picked them up from the mall. Who does that? Happened to a friend of mine. He's not a Uber or a taxi driver, but he was a security guard doing patrol driving. The way his car was stickered up could easily confuse somebody into thinking it was a taxi, especially at night. So this one evening he's driving from one job to another for his patrol. He pulls up at a set of traffic lights next to some nightclub. All of a sudden this drunk guy and his GF get into the back and give him an address to drive to. My mate explains to the guy that he's not a security guard and not a taxi driver. The dude gets confused for a second, then starts laughing thinking my friend is joking around with him and repeats the address where they want to go. My friend decides to make the best of the situation when he realizes the guy's house is only a few streets away from where he has to go for his next patrol job anyway, so he drives off. Drops the guy and his GF at their destination. And when the guy asks the price, my friend says $150. No hesitations, the guy hands over the money and leaves. A regular taxi would have only cost like $30 or $40. He was so blind drunk he didn't realize my mate was ripping him off. A friend of mine was a Postmates delivery driver and had a Wendy's order. He said it was to an apartment building, and when he reached the room he kept knocking but there was no answer. He heard ambulance sirens and screeching tires and people yelling. Paramedics came up to the floor and were yelling at him to see if she was still alive. Turns out the girl had ODD. Not the driver. My uncle is. But he had Chris Evans sit in the car with him, and my uncle never realized until he saw Chris on the big screen. Everybody who was under 30 in the house was surprised and angry he didn't take a picture. Not a driver. But one time my friend and I, both mid-20s F, went to a bar and immediately were approached by 3 very intoxicated 40-something-year-old men. They asked if we could give them a ride to a nearby hotel. And when we hesitated they said they'd give $20 and that the bartender could vouch they were good people. I guess one guy was his cousin. The hotel was less than a mile away. So we said duck it and agreed. At that point they called over a fourth guy. And all came out to pile in my car. Now, my car is a subcompact hatchback and there's 6 people piling in. No way were we getting a fourth full grown man in the back seat. So being a hatchback he just put him in the trunk. As we're driving there, they're doing their drunken banter when one of them goes, "Are you guys Uber?" The guy in the trunk responds, "I'm in the ducking trunk and you're asking if they're Uber." I died laughing. Totally worth it. I drove for Uber in Flagstaff, AZ for drunk college kids. I never had anybody puke. I had a girl pee herself though. She said she had to go. Her sister was with her. I asked if she wanted me to pull over. Her sister said no. She got out in the middle of the street and peed. But wet herself too. The ducked up thing was that she was only like 200 feet from her hotel. I charged her the $150 cleaning fee. I bet next time she goes out she pees before she leaves the bar. HA.